former presidential candidate Andrew Yang gained notoriety during the 2020 campaign, not only by championing UBI as a policy, but also running some pilot programs throughout the primary. Now that the pandemic has placed millions of Americans out of work, Washington is stalled on relief. He has ramped up his UBI experiments through his new organization, Humanity Forward.
That's right. And just last week, he announced that 2 residents in South Carolina would receive $1,000 a month for the rest of the year. And Humanity Forward has also announced projects in Washington State and Hudson, New York. So Andrew, he's the founder now of Humanity Forward. He joins us now via Skype. Hardly needs an introduction. Andrew, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Great to see you, Andrew.
Great to see you, too. Hope you're doing well.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, let's start off. Give us an update on the program that you're starting here. But even broader, I mean, your idea, I remember covering the polling on UBI here on the show in the very early days of your campaign, something like 20% support. And now, it's one of the most commonly suggested solutions right and left. What's it been like for you personally to see the explosion of the idea after your campaign ended?
It's made me incredibly grateful to everyone who supported our campaign, Sagar, because I feel like we advanced universal basic income and cash relief just in the nick of time when this crisis was about to hit. So it's gratifying that so many people now see this is what we have to do for our people. But it's heartbreaking that we're being forced into this because of record depression level unemployment numbers and this pandemic that has devastated so many communities.
Yeah, and Andrew, just for people who haven't followed closely what Humanity Forward is up to, talk to us about the pilot projects that you're working on there and what the ultimate goal is.
Humanity Forward is advancing many of the ideas of my campaign, including universal basic income. So we are distributing $6.5 million in cash relief immediately to Americans around the country. $1 million of it went out in the Bronx, and millions more going out through our website, movehumanityforward.com, in increments of anywhere between $250 and $1,000 for the folks who were part of the original Bronx grant. And now we're putting into effect a long-term trial in a town in New York State called Hudson, where 20 residents will get $500 a month for 5 years. So it's the longest trial in the United States. And we're hoping to expand that trial in the days ahead because we have other people who are interested in funding it to make it bigger.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, what are some of the ideas that you've been most heartened to see Democratic and Republican response since the pandemic began, and what's disheartened you the most?
What's disheartened me the most is the fact that the vast majority of the stimulus money has gone straight into companies' hands. Only 10% or less is going to households around the country. And we're using the tools at our disposal, which is state unemployment offices and the IRS. But those systems are not designed really to get money into the hands of millions of Americans. On the flip side of that, I'm thrilled that it's nearly unanimous that we need to take more dramatic measures to help get resources into people's hands. Again, 80% of Americans are for emergency cash relief, and hopefully our legislators will listen to the American people on that.
Yeah. Andrew, part of why we were so interested in your campaign, and I think why you captured the imagination and attention of so many people, is because you really understood how even before the pandemic, while the top line economic numbers were looking good, that there were a lot of people who were struggling, whose backs were against the wall, and that was a fundamentally unsustainable situation. Now we see through the spark of police brutality and violence, not just in Minnesota, but what we saw in terms of racist violence with Ahmaud Arbery, what we saw with police violence with Breonna Taylor as well. We see this conflagration across the country. Just talk to us about what you see is going on, what are the important dynamics at play, and what the path forward looks to be for you.
I'm like every other American where it's horrifying and heartbreaking what happened to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. This response is born, as you're suggesting, Crystal, of the fact that millions of Americans do not feel like our leaders have been responsive to them and their needs. The fact that economic despair is now rampant in this country and the pandemic has made it much worse. So we're unfortunately, in a state where a spark can light a fire in terms of protests and people feeling like their voices will not be heard unless they come together on the streets. And I wish it had not gotten to this point. Certainly, the officer who killed George Floyd should be arrested immediately, well before anyone else gets arrested for, let's say, for example, my CNN colleague who was reporting on the aftermath in Minneapolis. The fact that he got arrested before the officer is exactly what's frustrating so many people.
Yeah, I mean, that really was absolutely stunning, Andrew. And one of the things that we loved so much about your campaign here on the show was about the recognition of the real social ills and problems that we had in America, and especially economically. How do you see that, kind of exacerbated by the pandemic, especially along class lines, which is something that you kind of alone in the field always seem to understand so well?
We were in the midst of the greatest winner-take-all economy in the history of our country before the pandemic. And unfortunately, the pandemic has just increased the inequality, because who's able to work? People who are able to just, like beam in and do their work from afar. Who can't go to work? Servers, ushers, security guards, stylists at a nail salon. And so the inequality in this country is going to be worse for a generation. And it was already at record highs. I mean, you're looking at 40 million jobs lost. 40% of those jobs are gone for good. That's 16 million jobs. That's almost 2 times the job loss of the Great Recession at its worst. So we have to face facts that we're in the midst of a new Great Depression in terms of its impact on communities around the country. And we need to think much, much bigger about how we're going to help move millions of Americans forward in this environment. Like, it makes me despair anytime I think about what millions of Americans are going through. And I see it through Humanity Forward, because we're getting tens of thousands of requests for emergency relief from families in need. And we know we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. I mean, Andrew, you're also a bit of a visionary. I mean, you were kind of a canary in the coal mine saying, this is where we're headed. We got to do something about it now. What do you see as happening next? Where do we go from here?
Crystal, the only cause for optimism I have is that we can accelerate the solutions as well as the problems. I've been saying that we've gone through 10 years worth of change in the last 10 weeks in terms of the acceleration of job displacement. And hopefully we can galvanize new energy around not just universal basic income, but universal health care. Having health care tied to your job makes no sense when you have 40 million unemployed. So my motivation right now is for us to get our legislators on board with real solutions, because the government has to lead us out of this crisis. There is no other entity or organization that has the scale and the resources to do so. I wish I had better news for those of you who aren't fans of that, but that's just the reality. It's like you have a $22 trillion economy on fire. There's no one but the federal government that can put the fire out.
Well, and you've been very active, and we've been covering here some of the endorsements that you've been making. Some of them, frankly, take a lot of courage going up against, sort of anointed DSCC type candidates. How are you making those choices, and what is sort of your vision in terms of those endorsements?
That's one of the joys of Humanity Forward, is that, frankly, we can just make our own judgments and determinations. It's not like, we're scared of pissing anyone off. Honestly, like if there's a candidate who is fighting for the right things and a vision that aligns with ours, then we will back them. And I have had the privilege of talking to each and every one of these candidates. They are great people. There are really extraordinary patriots around the country who want to try and do better for their community, and it's a privilege to be able to back them and hopefully elevate some of them to victory in their elections. It's going to make me so happy when some of the Humanity Forward candidates win. So I've enjoyed that process a great deal, and I have to say it's new to me because a number of months ago, no one would have cared who Andrew Yang endorsed, frankly. But but now we have a mailing list of 1 million Americans, like almost half of whom donated to my campaign. So we can make a real difference in local races and
Yeah.
national races.
Have you taken any heat? I saw you endorsed just recently Jen Perlman up against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, for example. Have you taken any heat from the sort of establishment figures here? Are they upset with you?
The establishment right now is focused on helping Joe win, and everyone knows I'm going to help Joe win in any way I can. So, no one's reached out to me about any of our endorsements. I think they have reached out to people on my team, but my team's done a good job of deflecting.
Well, good for
work,
them.
staffers.
The Yang Gang is still alive. Thanks, Andrew. We
Great
appreciate
to see
it.
you, Andrew. Be well, please.
Thanks to people like you. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Saagar. You two are honest journalists doing great work.
Thank you, man.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
for doing our best. All right, we'll have more Rising for you after this.